If you gave me 1,000 years and an infinite supply of paint, I could fill 1,000 museums with the most beautiful artwork you've ever seen based off of the images I was seeing on my kitchen floor.
You've been pranked,
They're very dangerous. There's potential to kill yourself using them. And I came to the realization that I am God. It's like, whoa, the wall is moving. The poor laugh was today as I was in my ass. Ding dong YouTube, welcome back to the channel. I'm the Jobless Coder, and Connor Murphy is not crazy. I repeat, Connor Murphy is not crazy. Oh boy, I can already tell this video is going to be well into an hour's long. I'm going to do my very best to break this video into segments and have the timestamps and everything in the video so that you can jump to different sections if you don't have enough time to watch the entire thing. But just based on the amount of content that I have to get through and the ideas that I want to get out there, I'm going to say this video is probably going to be in the range of 40 minutes, if not pushing an hour long. Connor Murphy, if you don't know, is one of the largest fitness influencers in the whole fitness and bodybuilding niche that's on YouTube and other social media platforms. Or at least he was, until his content changed quite drastically over the last year. His channel has about 2.5 million subscribers. I think at one point he had upwards of 3 million subscribers, which makes him even larger than other channels such as More Plates, More Dates, Greg Doucette, Don Mazzezzi, I can never pronounce that right, and Bradley Martin, to name a few other influential fitness YouTubers. Now, Connor Murphy made his name quite big about 5 years ago with the type of content he was producing that would typically involve being in a group of girls, usually in a public setting, and he would dress as, you know, some kind of nerdy guy with, like, you know, maybe a Pokemon hat, and the typical stereotype, I guess, you know, for nerdy people is that, you know, they don't really have attractive bodies, or they can't be ripped and muscular, and so he would dress really nerdy, and he would find some way of, you know, ripping off his shirt or whatever in the middle of the video just to get the reaction of some of these girls, and that was kind of the shock content value of the videos that he was making. The video quality had a lot of memeability to it. You know, it was something that could go easily viral on Facebook. Like, hey, look at this guy, or whatever, what he's doing, just ripping his shirt off in public to impress these women. Now, the videos don't necessarily hold up to the best of standards. Keep in mind that these videos were made in early 2016, prior to the whole Me Too movement. And while I think the Me Too movement did more good than it did harm in the end, I think that it was drastically blown out of proportions to the point that, you know, now a lot of guys are not even wanting to even bother talking with women or whatnot over fear of, you know, just getting a random rape accusation thrown against them and having their entire life and career thrown down the toilet. But this video is not, you know, to talk about, you know, my political views on the Me Too movement. It's to address the issues with Connor Murphy.
This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs.
Sometime within the last year, probably because of the stress of the lockdowns and coronavirus, Connor Murphy decided that it would be a good idea to take ayahuasca. And instead of just taking ayahuasca, which, if you don't know what that is, it is the most potent psychedelic drug that is on the face of the earth. It's the type of drug that, you know, most people would only do once in their entire lifetime, for some kind of once-in-a-lifetime changing experience, if they even do it at all. And from the last time I understood, it was even illegal in the States, so I don't even know where he managed to get a hold of it. I'm assuming that he probably lives in California, because the drug laws there are pretty nonchalant. Normally, the other videos I've seen of people that take ayahuasca, they have to go to the middle of the rainforest somewhere in some, like, you know, cultural tribe or whatever, where they do this ritual ceremony and they take the drug and get this crazy psychedelic experience. But Connor Murphy decided to take it to a whole new level by microdosing every 2 hours on the drug for pretty much the last several months at this point, and he has absolutely cooked his frickin' brain.
It's my shadow.
The type of content that Connor Murphy is now producing on his channel can only be described as weird. It is weird and bizarre, and you can tell that he's high and he's made these videos on drugs. It has no consistency to any of it. There doesn't seem to be any purpose or reason for uploading to his channel. I mean, this guy makes Onision look down to earth.
Do you like kombucha? I love kombucha!
I mean, Connor Murphy is extremely attractive. Like, if he was gay, I would definitely 10 out of 10 bang. And in fact, he might actually be gay now, or at least bisexual as a result of taking these drugs. As he posted a recent video on his channel where he ingested another man's cum. Now, it's actually quite funny seeing some of the other content creators on YouTube react to this ingestion of cum as though it's the weirdest thing they've ever seen, and how bizarre is it, and this is just not normal. I don't know if it's, you know, the bubble that I'm living in or whatever, the fact that I'm gay and a member of the LGBT community, but this is not super weird to me, you know? This is actually quite normal amongst a lot of gay men, the ingestion of cum. In fact, it's a fetish for a lot of people. They find it very attractive. So for me, it's not, you know, a big deal. But all of the people that are reacting to this are straight, and so I can, you know, maybe see some of the confusion that they might have regarding this. However, I don't think he's crazy, and I'll tell you why. Now, several other content creators have already done, you know, videos on this topic and covered Connor Murphy, and most of them have been in the fitness industry, because that's kind of the niche that Connor Murphy has built up with his audience on YouTube here, and a lot of them don't actually have any experience with psychedelic drugs. I know a few people have mentioned that, you know, they've taken certain drugs and whatnot, but I wanted to address this issue because I thought that I might have a very unique perspective to provide to the story here, given that I've actually taken a few psychedelic drugs myself and had some very interesting experiences on them. Nothing as strong as, you know, ayahuasca that Connor Murphy was taking, but enough that I can actually relate with him and understand what he's actually saying. I've taken enough of these drugs that I can relate with what's happening in Connor Murphy's head, but not enough that I've gone completely off the deep end like he has. I'm still able to, you know, present and communicate ideas in a way that I think the normal, average, everyday person that has never taken these drugs before would be able to understand exactly what it is that he's experiencing, having never taken the drugs themselves. Now, some of the other creators that have mentioned that they have taken these drugs before, they don't really address, you know, what it is that's happening to Connor Murphy's brain developmentally and why it is that, you know, these drugs have changed him so drastically. They don't really get into the meat and the potatoes of it, which is what I was hoping to do in this video. So I hope you sit back and enjoy my analysis of why I think that Connor Murphy is not actually crazy. Now, a few disclaimers to get out of the way. I am not in any way a licensed doctor. I'm not a health expert. I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't have a medical license of any sort. This is just my personal experience having taken these drugs. I'm just some random person on the internet, and you should always consult your own doctor when considering any kind of psychedelic drugs. A lot of them are illegal, so you won't even be able to talk to them about it. And the goal of this video is not to glorify these drugs. There is some very serious side effects to them, as you've seen with Connor Murphy, and it would also be against YouTube's policies to glorify them, but I can present the information in an educational and entertaining way that fits within the content guidelines of YouTube. Now, the first question you probably have is, why would I be taking psychedelic drugs in the first place? Well, I have had mental illness issues basically since I was born. OCD and depression and PTSD in most recent years with all the trauma and things that have happened in my life. And the list of, diseases and illnesses just continues to grow and grow and grow every year. I just continue to collect more mental illnesses. I have been in and out of therapy since I was 6 years old and prescribed by professional psychologists upwards of 20 different drugs, none of which did any good for me. They did not do any good whatsoever to help me with my mental illness issues. Now, the classification of these drugs that I was taking, most of them are called SSRIs, and that stands for selective serotonin receptors. Now, serotonin is the stress hormone, and essentially when you take these drugs, it's supposed to suppress the creation of the hormone in the body and in the brain. And the idea is that a lot of mental illnesses, especially OCD-related ones, are strictly related to stress. The more stress and anxiety you have, the worse the symptoms of the illness become. So by taking these drugs, the hope is that it will help to decrease the stress. And then you do that in conjunction with certain training with the psychologist. So if there's, something in particular that really stresses you out, like me, for instance, if it's germs or whatever, they try to expose you to that. But if they did it without the drugs, your stress would be really high. When you take the drugs, your stress is supposed to be a bit lower. For me, it never worked, but it's supposed to be lower. So that way you can experience the stress, but without the high levels of stress that you would typically get. So that way over time, you can build up a tolerance for it. And eventually the goal is that the thing stressing you out no longer becomes that big of a deal in your life. Now keep in mind, these drugs that I was taking were medically prescribed to me, and they were completely authorized by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, even though a lot of the drugs that I was taking have unbelievable amounts of side effects.
Common side effects include drowsiness, tiredness, and appetite changes. Do not drive or operate heavy machinery until you know how Xanax affects you. Always take this medication only as prescribed.
Although I didn't experience any of the benefits, I certainly experienced the side effects. In some cases, it actually makes the depression work. It can make you lethargic. I've experienced erectile dysfunction while taking these drugs. The most recent drug that I was taking, I can't remember, exactly off the top of my head the name of it, but it actually increased my suicidal tendencies. And this was given to me at a time when I had just lost everything in Vancouver, had to move back in with my parents. I was already, feeling crappy about my life and situation. And so I go to the psychologist and she prescribes me a drug that makes my suicidal tendencies 10 times worse. I was dreaming about killing myself every single night. Every single possible way that you can think of to kill yourself, I was dreaming about it. I have died hundreds of times in my dreams to the point that death no longer scares me. So the decision was made between me and my parents that I was going to cold turkey stop taking these drugs and I wasn't going to be doing them anymore. Instead, what happened was I was put into a CBT group. It stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, and it's a mental health training exercise that is a tool that you can use to help with your mental illness. I actually made 2 videos on my channel here documenting my experience with the CBT, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. I intended for it to be a full 6 videos, as there was 6 sessions set up initially, but then the coronavirus shut everything down, and then 3 weeks later we continued it with the Zoom call, but at that point I was kind of just like, I'm not that interested anymore, and so I just kind of stopped making that video series. But I do have 2 videos, if you want to check them out, going over the therapy that I got. And this is something that I'll be getting into a little bit later into the video, how it relates to taking psychedelic drugs. But I personally believe that psychedelic drugs, if they weren't, illegal and scientists could actually study the effects of them, they have absolutely wonderful potential to become the leading medical treatment for various mental illnesses because they are so effective. Now, although the drugs that I was taking, the SSRIs, were making me more suicidal, when I came off them, that didn't change. I was still really depressed. I still hated my life. I still do to this day hate my life. I still think about killing myself, on the occasional basis. But at this point, it was every single day. And I'm posting on social media about how much I hate my life. So, I had a friend from high school reach out to me, and he saw the stress and anxiety that I was undergoing and the depression that I was facing and how much I hated my life. And so he offered to send me some psychedelic drugs that he takes, and just to see what the effects of them would be. And he told me that they would do wondrous things for my mental health that no other drug could. And given that I was already suicidal and thinking about killing myself, I thought, what do I have to lose? Take these drugs and, maybe it gives me some kind of crazy side effect. Maybe I fry my brain. Whatever, I want to die anyways. Now, the specific psychedelic drugs that I was sent that I took was called 25I-N-bomb-E, and this is the chemical composition of the molecule. Now, I've taken this drug 4 times now. The first time I took it, I took a single tablet. And when I say tablet, I mean these things are very tiny. It's a tiny little rectangle piece of cardboard that has the chemical of the drug on the surface of it. And you put it under your tongue and it dissolves in your saliva. The first time I took it, I took 1 tablet. And I didn't really experience, anything that was out of this world. I was a little bit dizzy. I had a bit of a headache. And I was, looking at my computer screen, which is a little bit distorted. The second time I took it, I was so bloody depressed because I had just been stood up by yet another date on Grindr. Every time I try and use the app to try and get a date with somebody, 9 out of 10 times I get stood up. So I was depressed and hated everything, and I'm like, whatever, I just want to experience death. So I took 4 tablets. I didn't know how risky that was or not, but I took 4 of these tablets, and the experience was unbelievable. And I'll be getting into that in a little bit, what I actually saw and experienced. The third time I took it, I took 2 tablets and I worked out. Because I have a home gym, a Bowflex machine, I wanted to see if there was any effect on my working out routine, if I was able to, lift any more weight. Maybe the psychedelic would make the weight feel less and then I would be able to lift more. It didn't really have the experience that I thought I was going to while working out. It was still very difficult to increase the amounts of weight that I was lifting. And it was also really bad too, because I guess I wasn't paying attention. I don't know if it was induced by the drug or not, but during the workout routine, one of the resistance bands of the Bowflex machine came down, and on the arc that it came down, it hit the barbell that I had rested up against the wall. And the wall kind of sticks out a little bit where the fireplace is, and so the barbell went sliding down the wall and then onto the other side of the fireplace. And my roommate has this nice looking cabinet. It looks like one of those phone booths you might find in Europe, and he has his CDs in there, and it's with all glass shelving and everything. Well, the barbell hit this cabinet and it sent it crashing over. It hit the ground and glass shattered everywhere. It was an absolute mess, and I was having a full-on anxiety attack at that point. My roommate came running out and he saw what happened, and I was freaking out. I had just broken this thing. I didn't even know if it could be replaced, and so he helped me clean up the glass, and I was shaking physically, and he could tell that I was having an anxiety attack. So he told me to go out for a walk. Now, this is kind of where it got a little bit scary, because I went outside and I went down the block and I went down another block, and then I had no idea where I was. Because these streets that I've walked hundreds of times at this point over, it was absolutely new to me. It was like I was in another dimension. I didn't know where I was, to be honest. And if it wasn't for the fact that I live at an intersection that it's on a numerical street, it's at this number, and I know, all right, if I want to get back home, I just have to walk this many blocks in this direction and that many blocks in that direction. If it wasn't for the fact that my street number is numerical, if it was just some random name for a street, I don't even know if I would have made it back home, because I wouldn't know which direction to go. And this is one of the risks that is involved with taking these drugs. If you're outside and it's the middle of the night and you're wandering around and you're clearly confused and dazed, and maybe a police officer pulls up and asks what you're doing, if you're lost or anything, and maybe you don't know who he is. You start freaking out. You think he's coming here to rob you or kill you or whatever, and so maybe you try and attack him in self-defense, and the next thing you know, you end up getting shot or arrested or whatever for assaulting a police officer. So I would absolutely implore you that if anybody takes any of these drugs, they should do it in a controlled setting in their own home, possibly, hopefully under supervision. I know it's hard to find people to supervise you when a lot of people are very touchy on the topic and they would just tell you straight up don't take them in the first place. But if you can find supervision, that would be best, and do it in a controlled setting where you're not going to be wandering out in the street and getting run over by a car or something. And the most recent time, the last time that I took these drugs, I took 3 tablets and I came to the realization that I am God.
I am God.
And this is something very profound, I think, because if you look at a lot of people who take psychedelic drugs, they typically start referring to themselves as God and Jesus, and this is what Connor Murphy is doing right now. He's got on his Instagram profile that he's God, and he's referring to himself as Jesus, and I had this same realization, and this is why I don't think he's crazy, because there's something very scientifically rooted in this conception where every single person who takes this drug comes back with the realization that they are God. And that's something that I'm going to get into a little bit in the video when I address, religion and everything like that. But for now, I want to show you this very short clip of Connor Murphy rambling.
You are God, motherfucker. I will talk to you later.
I agree, man.
I gotta go. I will talk to you later. Everyone's fucking God and they don't realize it.
This one little chunk of video stood out to me so strongly that I had to address it, because this is what I meant when I said earlier that I can understand what it is that Connor Murphy's trying to say, because I've had these same feelings and same experiences myself. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about is the effects of the drug and the things that I witnessed and experienced. Now, a lot of people will chalk drugs up to hallucinations. So they'll say, oh, you're just hallucinating, you're crazy, this isn't real, that isn't reality, and they chalk it up to pseudoscience, and drugs aren't that scientific. Actually, it's extremely scientific. It's extremely scientific, and the reason for that being is that science is about consistency. It's a process of repeatability. And I will tell you that although the experiences that I have on the drug each time are different, and the things that I see and hear and experience are different each time, there are very fundamental consistencies with the drug trip, at least with this specific drug. And because they're consistently the same every single time, that leaves me to believe that there is something fundamentally scientific about what is happening to my brain when I am on this drug. Now, because I'm a computer programmer, I'm actually going to try and explain this as best I possibly can in terms of a computer. The human brain is basically this natural computer with neurons that are all connected and firing in tandem, and essentially the neurons act like the ones and zeros, the bits on a computer. And the thing about a computer is that it's actually versatile to infinity. You can do anything possible that you could possibly think of creating on a computer, it can be done. And all it requires is the right combination of ones and zeros. And you can actually see this on a Windows machine. If you open up the registry files, you can actually see the bits of data that are stored. And it can be very dangerous to play around with the registry files, because if you turn one bit off, one bit could completely destroy the functionality of your computer. That's all it takes. And if you just start randomly messing with the operating system files and everything like that, you could completely break your computer. There is a small % chance that you might actually do something to the computer that would be more beneficial in the end. Let's say you would flip on 1 0 here and turn off 1 0 there, and then all of a sudden the computer is working, better than it used to before. There's some new feature that didn't exist before. But there's a greater chance that you're going to fuck it up and your computer is no longer going to work. And this is why I think that these drugs are so dangerous, because essentially what they're doing to the brain is they're taking these neurons and they're just flipping switches on and off in the brain. Now, I don't know, because I haven't done enough research into these drugs and I haven't used them enough, I don't know if there's any control over which neurons in the brain are being turned on and off. I don't know if it's either controlled subconsciously or you might have some conscious control over it, or maybe it's just random. You take the drug and it's just randomly flipping switches on and off. This is where it becomes extremely dangerous, and why these drugs are probably illegal, is because if it is just randomly flipping switches on and off in the brain, then you could, inadvertently flip off the switch that controls motor skill functions, for example, the reptilian part of the brain that has this kind of low level, breathing and the circulatory system. And if it just flips it off like that, now you can't breathe and then you suffocate to death, or your heart stops pumping blood. There absolutely has been instances of people that have taken drugs like this or other psychedelic drugs and then they just drop dead. And what's probably happening is that certain neurons in their brain that control the ability to live just turn off like that. Now, that reason for the neurons turning on and off like that is also why I think these could be such a beneficial tool for diagnosing certain mental illnesses, because everything in your brain, all your memories, your personality, your likes, your dislikes, they're all just data in your brain with certain neurons. So if you have something that's really traumatizing in your life, some PTSD, or you've got something that causes great deals of anxiety, when you take SSRIs and you do years and years and years of training with CBT and seeing a mental health therapist, the idea is that you're going to retrain those neurons to grow in new patterns. You don't think that way anymore. The problem with that is, number one, it can take years and years of training to accomplish. Number two, there's no guarantee that it even can accomplish. Essentially, what I think these psychedelic drugs do is they subvert the process, right? So if you have some kind of traumatizing thing in your life that's really bothering you, it is literally as simple as flipping that neuron on or off, and then it's done. In an instant, it no longer bothers you. It's like when you take this drug, it feels like you're somehow now a different person, because you think differently than you did before. The things that you experience while high and the things that you see and that you think that are going through your brain, you will have thoughts that you cannot have sober. You will see things that cannot be seen sober. You will see colors that do not exist in nature. That is how crazy these drugs are. If you gave me 1,000 years and an infinite supply of paint, I could fill 1,000 museums with the most beautiful artwork you've ever seen based off of the images I was seeing on my kitchen floor. After taking the drug, it takes about half an hour to experience any results or side effects. And I do not know where it is that I am when I am high on this drug, but I can say that it is the same place every single time. Wherever it is, whether it's in another dimension or another reality even, it is the same place every single time, which means it's not just hallucinating, because there are fundamentally consistent things about this place. The first consistency is that I can see the quantum wave function. Now, I'm going to try and explain this as best I can for people that don't really understand quantum physics. This is kind of my little crash course on quantum physics. Because of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, you can never know the position and the wave function of a particle at the exact same time. A particle can also be a particle and a wave at the same time, and because of the double slit experiment and the measurements that they had beyond that, they were able to determine that it's a wave when you're not observing it, and it's a particle when you are observing it. Now, although the science behind quantum physics is well over 100 years now at this point, a lot of people don't understand how it works. There was a documentary that was done in 2004. It was called What the Bleep Do We Know? It was also referred to as Down the Rabbit Hole. And it was done very poorly. It did a very, very poor job of trying to explain how quantum mechanics works, because it left the majority of the audience with this belief that somehow their consciousness was impacting the inanimate reality around them, and that by observing something they were actually changing the physical structure of it. And this kind of got taken to the pseudoscience, weird ass, woo-woo type stuff, like, oh, you can think and manifest things into reality. And I think The Secret then came out of that. Lots of physicists, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, have done a much better job of explaining how the quantum wave function actually works. And the best way to explain it is, imagine your wall here. Your wall is completely flat, and the wall is comprised of billions upon billions of tiny little atoms. And those atoms are actually moving around. Although the wall is a solid object, there is space in between the atoms because they're not exactly bound together. There's a bit of space for them to move. And what's holding them together is the electromagnetic bonds. And the weaker the bonds, the more space there is. So you get the three states. You get solid, and then you get liquid, and then you get gas. And then there's a fourth state beyond that, which is plasma. And I think scientists even recently discovered the existence of a new fifth state of matter. But essentially, the electromagnetic bonds hold the wall together. But the particles are moving. When a photon, which is a particle of light, bounces off of one of the atoms on the wall, and then it bounces towards your eyeball, and it hits the retina on the back, essentially what happens is it's like a billiard ball on a pool table. When the particle hits the wall, it actually moves the atom. A bit of energy is exchanged between the particle of the photon of light, it hits the atom of the wall, it moves it, and then it bounces back. Because energy is lost in that exchange, it also changes the wavelength of the particle. That's how we see color. So, for example, surfaces that absorb more of the energy of the particle causes the wavelength to be stretched out. The longer the wavelength of the light is, the redder the hue is. The more energy that the photon particle retains, the bluer it is. The shorter the wavelength is, and then it bounces back and hits on your retina, and that's how you see color. But the thing is because it displaces the atom slightly as it bounces back, now the atom is in a different location. So as you are looking at the wall, it is not the same wall as it is in this moment of existence. You're seeing the wall as it was a fraction of a second in the past, because it takes time for the light particle to travel from the wall to your eye. Just like it takes time for the light particles to travel from a star that's thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of light years away. And that light's traveling for thousands of years, in some cases even millions of years. By the time we are seeing the stars that are out there in the distance, they might not even exist anymore. They're gone, but the light from them is still traveling to us, so we perceive it as though it exists. So then, the next particle bounces off the wall, and it moves the atom again, and then the atom gets moved again, and it's this continuous process of the atoms of the wall shifting around. Now the question is, if the wall is not solid, why is it that we cannot see the movement of these particles? Actually, you can. I believe that everyone has the ability to perceive the quantum wave particle, and there is either a switch or a neuron or something that is turned off in the brain that prevents you from being able to perceive that. And if a neurosurgeon could open up your head and flip a single neuron in your brain from a 0 to a 1, like a computer, like the bit in a computer, flip it on, you would be able to perceive it. When I say that I can perceive the quantum wave particle, the best way to describe it is that everything is made of liquid. The walls, the roof, the floor, everything is moving. It's like this fluid. Everything is very loose and wavy, and it is the weirdest thing I have ever seen in my entire life. And I'm not exactly sure if these drugs have done anything permanently to my brain, but if I look at the wall or I look at the ceiling long enough now that I'm sober and not on the drug, I can actually perceive a little bit. It's not as extreme. If you're on this drug, it's like, whoa, the wall is moving. But I can kind of perceive a little bit of movement if I look really long and hard. I think that many thousands of years ago, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, however far evolution goes back, this was actually how people perceived the world. And slowly, as a process of evolution over time, these neurons in the brain have become dormant because they don't really serve any purpose. And imagine, somebody has motion sickness. Imagine living your entire life where everything around you is constantly moving. The motion sickness would just be unbearable. Your life would be absolutely miserable. And so it would also make, things like hunting in hunter-gatherer tribes much more difficult if you're trying to, hunt a wild animal and you can't really perceive where it is because everything is moving like that. So I think that over a period of time, the process in the human brain has turned those neurons off. They've become dormant, but they still exist. And if you could simply flip them on like that, you would be able to see it too. I did want to mention what it's like touching a surface that's moving, because it's still solid, keep in mind, but you perceive the wall and the floor and the roof as though they're moving. And so I did this. I put my hand on the floor, and it feels like there's this infinitely small and thin sheet of glass over top of the floor, and underneath you can see the particles of the floor moving like this, but you can't actually feel the movement. It's still solid. It still feels like a floor when you touch it. But this is the weirdest thing, is that if you look at how touch works, essentially you cannot touch anything, because when you actually put your hand on something, when you touch something, what you're feeling is the electromagnetic repulsion of that object. And so there's this very thin field that floats above the atoms of the surface of an object, and this electromagnetic field is what prevents you from putting your hand through the object. If there was a way to turn that field off, you could essentially stick your hand through walls and doors and stuff, like a ghost. And this is the craziest thing. Everything that I have told you thus far, this is not pseudoscience, weird bullshit. This is not crazy conspiracy theories. This is scientific reality. This is what quantum mechanics dictates and determines the universe operates like at the subatomic particle level. And I've seen it personally. Now, the other consistency that I experience has to do with time. Time is the only thing that is consistent in this universe, and it is weird because it feels like you're in this kind of enclosed bubble where the universe begins and ends with the walls and the floors and the roof of your house or your room or wherever you're taking these drugs. It's like I can almost perceive that there's nothing beyond the wall other than what the universe is. It's kind of like in a video game when you have a big level and not all of the level is loaded at the same time, only what you're experiencing is loaded to help with the, frame rate or whatever. So although I know that there's an outside on the other side of this wall, it's actually not there until I go there and perceive it. Otherwise, it's just, this empty universal quantum goo, essentially, that can exist in any form or state. And then the moment you go outside and you perceive it in that state. And this is something I've actually experienced taking just straight up weed. You don't have to take psychedelic drugs to experience this. I've taken pot before, weed. It's legal in Canada now. And I have had this weird distortion of time where it feels like you're living in slow motion. So I remember sitting in my friend's kitchen waiting for a ride, and it had only been about 5 minutes. I thought it was an hour. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna miss the ride or whatever. The guy that's coming to pick me up, he must be waiting for me. How long has it been? 5 minutes. Like 5 minutes later, how long has it been? I thought it was an hour. Five minutes. Like, you feel like you're living in slow motion almost. And I get this really weird thing that I experience while I'm on weed, where I can talk to somebody, but I'm not actually comprehending what it is that I'm saying. But what I am saying is comprehensible, because I get responses from them that are meaningful and they have something to do with whatever it is that I said. But it's like my brain can multitask, right? So I can have a full-on conversation with somebody. I have no clue what it is that I'm talking to them about because, I'm writing a 50-page dissertation in my head for a YouTube video. So I would definitely recommend that if anybody were to take psychedelic drugs or smoke weed, for example, you want to have a clock handy with you, because that is going to help ground you in reality and help you know where you are. Because when you experience time in this kind of linear fashion, right? I know, we experience time with night and day, and this is today, and then, it's midnight, and then it's the next day. When you're on certain psychedelic drugs, you don't perceive time that way. You just see time in this big, continuous, linear thing. Like, tomorrow is the future, and yesterday was the past, and you just view reality on this one continuous long strip of time. It's not like, all right, today, and then it's tomorrow, and then it's next week. You don't have this kind of segregated, divided up way that we've structured our society. The other consistent thing that I experience is this constant stream of words that is going through my head. And they're not real words. It's like taking different vowels and different consonants and combining them in the weirdest ways that have never been done before. You get these words like squizzbubble or Zorgborg, and they don't mean anything. They don't have any contextual value to them, but you start talking to yourself using these words and they make sense for whatever reason. It's like a foreign language. You just instantly learned a foreign language of these weird words that you just made up from other words and combined them together. So I'm going to say something right now that's going to be extremely controversial, and it's going to give anybody in the past year that has accused me for whatever reason of being a Nazi vindication, because I had the experience of loving Hitler on these drugs. Now, how exactly did I get down this tangent of, feeling love for Hitler? It started with thinking about people that have hurt me in my life, people that have done very bad, awful things to me, and I don't really like them. And I started to think about them, where are they now? What are they doing, And I started to realize that I forgave them for the things that they had done to me. Because they're just off doing their own life. Everybody's trying to live their best life. And although they did do some really bad things to me and they hurt me quite a lot, I forgave them. So then the next step from that, I thought, okay, if I can forgive them, what about people that have done actual really bad things, murderers in prison, people that have raped other people? And I realized that I could forgive them too. And you can too. You can forgive anybody if you choose to. And I came to the realization that if I can forgive people that have wronged me in my life, and I can forgive bad people in prison that are murderers and rapists or whatever, what if you take it to the extreme? Could you possibly forgive someone like Hitler? And I came to the realization that it's possible. It is possible. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not socially acceptable. I don't think it's right to forgive someone that evil. But under the influence of these drugs, it's absolutely possible. And I know it sounds absolutely batshit crazy that I could have the experience of loving Hitler. But it is because I wasn't mentally aware of the social constructs of reality. The best way to explain it is with the cognitive behavioral therapy that I mentioned earlier. CBT is a training exercise that teaches you to remove emotion from things. So if you're somebody that experiences constant perpetual euphoria, you're just happy at everything and everything is wonderful all the time, that can almost be as damaging as if you were just depressed all the time, because some things you can't be happy about, right? Somebody dies and you're at the funeral and you're just happy or whatever. Some foreign country goes to war and starts dropping nuclear bombs and you're just happy about it. Like, that's not okay. That's not socially acceptable. But the way that CBT operates is it trains you to remove emotion from the situation. So if something really bad and traumatic has happened in your life, you have a right to feel upset about that. You have a right to get angry when bad things happen in the world. But the problem is that if you live in that anger and you live in that depression, it destroys your body physically and mentally. You start having heart complications. You could give yourself a premature heart attack. Your muscles are tensed up. You're always anxious like that. And so if you live perpetually like that, CBT can be really, really useful for removing the emotion from the situation, because it trains you to observe and recognize that something is either good or bad, but you don't attribute good or bad to it. It's about just perceiving reality as it comes without attributing this is good and that's bad and that's evil. So, taking CBT to the extreme, most level that you could possibly take it, you can look at somebody like Hitler who killed 6 million Jews and say, he's a cool dude. Because you don't have that emotion attached to the death of 6 million Jews. You can look at somebody who is a pedophile and say, oh, yeah, he's a cool dude. Because you don't have that emotion attached to it. And this is what I think the drugs are doing. They're essentially subverting the process of CBT and getting you at that state of complete apathy where you don't really care about anything anymore because nothing really matters in the end. And this is one of the things that Connor Murphy is talking about in his videos.
Well, I have a question for you. Is suicide bad?
And as long as you do, then you're part of a community, you're doing social activity. It's not like you're alone in a cave just by yourself. If you were just in a cave by yourself, starving yourself to death, I would say don't do that. But still, if you want to do it, go ahead. But you're not doing that. You're playing a very highly social role. It's not just that you have a little group of 5 people that you're doing this with. You're doing this with hundreds of thousands of people, and you're affecting my community as well. So you're not just doing it alone. You're even dragging me and others who I don't know who else you're dragging into this.
Connor Murphy recently released his banking details on Instagram and had $9,000 stolen from him. Now, every other person would be absolutely enraged over that. How could I be so stupid to release my social security number on the internet? How could I be so stupid to let somebody steal $9,000 from my bank account? Most people would get upset about that. But if you look at it from the perspective and the ethos and the philosophy of cognitive behavioral therapy, you would take that event of having somebody steal $9,000 from you, and you would learn to accept it as it is without attributing good or bad nature to that event. So I think that Connor Murphy is living in this perpetual state of bliss where he doesn't give a shit about anything. And that's why he's just, oh, this is cool and that's cool and child pornography is cool and Hitler is love. And keep in mind, right, these ideas don't define the person. Like, I am not in love with Hitler. I don't think anything he did was good. I think he was a bad guy that deserved to die, and we went to war with his country. But you have to understand that when you're on this drug, you don't feel those same emotions. You don't have the same perception as reality. I would actually be very interested to conduct a scientific experiment to see if it was even possible to have hatred for someone while on the drugs. And it could be conducted very simple, right? You could get somebody in a room and you could show them pictures, a series of pictures, and you could have them hooked up to some kind of EEG, vital machine, whatever, that's measuring their heart rate, and their sweating and their blood pressure, and you could show them a series of pictures of people. And so, maybe this person is cool and that person, maybe you show them a picture of their love and they have this deep emotion for them, and that gets measured on the electronic machining. And then you throw in some pictures of bad people. You throw in pictures of Mao, and you throw in pictures of Hitler, and you maybe have a picture, if you're somebody that thinks that Donald Trump is, the worst person that's ever lived, he's the orange Hitler, throw a picture of Donald Trump in there, and you'll be able to measure objectively the person's response to that through their heart rate and things like that. Now, what you do is you give this person some psychedelic drugs and you run the experiment again with the same set of pictures, and you take responses and see, does it actually change? If they had a negative response to a picture of Hitler before, do they feel the same way about him now? Because I guarantee you they won't. I would put my hypothesis to say that nobody feels hatred when they're high, because it is not possible to feel hatred when you're high. The best way that I understand it is, now, I grew up in a religious household. I'm not religious myself. I consider myself to be atheist. I think that the church has done a lot of bad in the world, especially within the LGBT community, which I previously mentioned I was a part of. I've seen a lot of friends that have been hurt drastically by family members that have been in the church, and they say, oh, it's not okay to be homosexual because it's a sin, and gay marriage is bad. It is possible, however, to believe in God and not be religious. Now, I'm kind of skeptical on whether or not God exists, but I do think that there's more to reality than we perceive and understand. And if the Bible, as it teaches, is to be believed, God is love. That's what it says in the Bible. I don't know what you believe. I don't care what you believe. It says in the Bible that God is love, and he views everyone equally, and he has no hatred for anybody because he's merciful and forgiving. If it is at all possible that this godlike figure could exist, the way that I saw Hitler while I was high was how I would think that God would see Hitler. he doesn't see the bad things that this person did because he's removed the emotion out of it, the CBT that I mentioned earlier, the ability to remove all emotion from something. And you can say, yes, that was objectively bad. And yes, that person is objectively evil. But as a person who existed as a quote-unquote creation of God or the universe or whatever, and that's about the best way that I can possibly explain it, is that I felt like I saw other people as though I would see God. Now, on the topic of religion, the other thing that I came to the realization that I mentioned previously is that I am Jesus. But this is where I think religion often gets misconstrued, and I think this is a big misconception of the Bible and how the Bible is taught and how modern-day Christianity operates, is that Jesus is this person that existed who's whatever, the Son of God and the Virgin Mary birth. But if you look at the word Jesus, Jesus is not a name. Jesus is a word. And the word means something very specific. The meaning of Jesus is messenger, specifically a messenger from God. So Jesus, although he might have been a person several thousand years ago that was, some enlightened person that provided all this knowledge or whatever and wisdom to humanity, anybody can be Jesus if they teach people about the nature of reality. Teaching people, being a mentor, being a teacher, being a father, being a prophet, whoever, anybody can be Jesus. So when you see people on social media like Connor Murphy saying, I am Jesus, it's not that he is the Jesus. It's not that I am the Jesus. It's that we are a Jesus. Anybody can be a Jesus if they practice what they preach and give the message of God to the world. And I'm not saying that to be religious, right? The message of God is something that is, treat your fellow man how you would want to be treated, right? Although I'm not Christian and I'm atheist, I still behave in a mannerism that is in line with Christianity, treat people nicely as best you can. Don't commit murder because that's wrong. And I don't believe that you need to have a religion to have these morals in your life. You can teach them secularly. You can teach people to be religious without the Bible and religious without God. But there's definitely more to the story because it's not just about God or it's not just about religion. One of the experiences that I have while on this drug, which is a consistent reoccurring experience, is the feeling of being this creator entity. And the best way to describe that is I've experienced an out-of-body experience where my physical body, it was almost like I was removed from it and I was this creator entity. And if you look at the attributes that God has in the Bible, there are two things that you can attribute to God. He is a creator, which can also be a destroyer, because creative destruction is just the flip side of the coin. So God in the Bible creates. God in the Bible also judges. He creates and he judges. And every single person has that ability. Every single person is like this creator entity from the prime creator. And we all have the ability to judge each other based on our actions, and we all have the ability to create and or destroy things. And so when I see a person, when I take this drug, I don't see them as their physical body. I see them as this creator entity that has the ability to destroy and also the ability to create. And when it comes to creation, the colors and the fractal patterns and the things that I see when I am high on this drug are so unbelievably insane. As I mentioned before, the painting on my floor. And everything is just so hyper visualized, and you can see lights, and there's these bright lights that just float there in the air. You have the ability to combine ideas, and you can physically see the two ideas, and you can smash them together in your hand. The best way I can describe it is when you watch the Iron Man movies, and Tony Stark has this projection hologram thing, and he's moving things here and he's pushing things there and he's combining things in this kind of visual representation. That's what reality looks like when you're on this drug. And I don't know if there's anything to that, whether or not that exists, whether or not it's in the brain, whether or not this is some attribute of, the godlike personality. Maybe this is the way that God sees the world, is the ability to create things. And this is why I think a lot of the stuff that people make when they take these trips, and then you see some of the content like what Connor Murphy makes, it's weird and bizarre, and it has these weird fractal patterns, and there's noises that don't make any sense, and there's words that don't make any sense.
It's not your fault, it's my fucking fault. I'm so fucking sorry. I'm sorry.
But when he's experiencing that in his head, when I'm experiencing that in my head, it makes perfect sense. I can speak to people in a foreign language that I just invented, and it makes perfect sense. And I'm sure the average person watching you probably thinks you're absolutely insane. But in your head, everything makes perfect sense. Now, the final experience that I wanted to describe while on these drugs is what happens when you come down from the high. Now, going back to Connor Murphy, this is actually where a lot of the danger comes into play, is because psychedelic drugs essentially dissolve your understanding of reality, and because it's playing around with the neurons in your brain and giving you new experiences, you will have ideas that are not socially acceptable. You will see things that are not technically real, but you will think they are real. And the problem is when you come off these drugs, when you start to come down from the high, is when you could have the potential to continue to have these thoughts. For example, if you look at Connor Murphy, he's talking recently, he's made a couple videos on child pornography. And it's got a lot of people, uncomfortable with him even mentioning that.
It might take a lot longer for everything to fall into place.
Dude, chat is not okay right now. They are highly concerned about the subject matter of what you just said.
Well, here, what if to help them calm their mind a little bit, part of it is exposing TikTok.
I can promise you this, he does not actually think that child pornography is acceptable. His person doesn't. But when you have these experiences on the drug, social constructs, they go out the window, right? I asked my friend, what is the craziest thing that you have ever experienced while taking this? And he told me he turned into a mountain. Now, you will probably laugh and think, that's absolutely crazy. How can you turn into a mountain? It's not as simple as I took shrooms and then I turned into a mountain. It's more complicated than that. It's more like the perception of what the human body is, 2 hands, 2 eyes, and a nose. That idea that is stored in your brain gets turned off for a brief period of time. So for a period of time, you have no conception of what it's like to have a body. Your body doesn't make any sense to you. And so essentially, you can visualize yourself as anything at that point. You could be an animal, you could be an object like a mountain, you can be anything, because the conception of the human body has been turned off. Now, this is where things get a little bit scary and where they potentially get a little bit dangerous, at least in the case with Connor Murphy, is that you arrive at an injunction point when you start to come off of the drug. When it starts to get out of your system and you become more sober, you arrive at an injunction point where you don't remember where it was that you came from. So down one path, you have all of your memories, everything about your life that you know, it's exactly as it is, and you're a human. Down the other path, all of your memories, everything about your life is the same. The only difference is you have all of those same memories, but as a mountain. So now you're standing there at the path thinking, wait a minute, where did I come from? Did I come from the reality where I was a human the entire time thinking that I was a human and I know that I'm a human? Or did I come from the reality where I was a mountain? And it feels like both of them are real. And you have no idea. You genuinely do not know which reality it is that you came from. So this is where it becomes a little bit dangerous. If you start to gravitate towards the path of, I think I was a mountain, and then you start going down that path, the further you go down that path, the more you come down off of the high, those neurons start to solidify in your brain. And when you are completely sober, whatever state your brain was last left in when on this drug becomes now a fixture of your personality. So if you go down that path of thinking that you're a mountain and you come off of that drug, now you're stuck. in a world full of humans thinking they're humans and you think you're a mountain. This is when things start to break down and you're no longer able to function as an adult human. This is why I think that Connor Murphy is not crazy. It's not because of the things that he says or that he does. It's because he mentally is a child. And I'm not saying that to be mean or cruel or anything. His brain has the mental capacity right now of a child. Because if you look at children, right, they think, you know, I'm a horsey or whatever. That was my sister when she was younger. She was a horsey and a kitty and everything. I think they genuinely believe that to some extent. That doesn't make it true, but they believe that in their heart of hearts that is true. So when you start doing this and you start going down that path of thinking you're a mountain, now you actually believe that it is true. And that's a very childlike mental state to have. You cannot function in society properly if everyone is a human and you think you're the only mountain in the world. So this is why I think Connor Murphy has essentially fried his brain, right? Because he's done the ayahuasca so many times and he's done it so repeatedly that certain things start to change, right? So if you do one trip and it changes something fundamental about your personality, and it can be good. Keep in mind, right, these drugs can be good for healing and helping. Because if you have a very traumatic mental illness, rigid thinking that can't be changed or can't be changed very easily, and you can just snap your fingers and flip some neurons off and on, and now you're all good and cured and everything, that's wonderful and perfect. But you start getting bad ideas that become part of your personality. If you do it once, you might have one bad idea. If you do it twice, you might have two bad ideas. If you continue to do it over and over and over again, and you microdose on it every 2 hours like Connor Murphy was doing, eventually at some point everything is screwed up. Everything about your personality has gone out the window to the point that you're not even recognizable anymore. You look at Connor Murphy today, he's not even the same person that he was before. He's not even an adult, really. He acts like a child if you watch his videos and the mannerisms that he has and the things that he says. None of it is based in reality. None of it is something that a functioning adult human would say. But I don't think that makes him crazy. I think that makes him sick. He's very sick right now. And it's possible that there is no way to reverse the damage that is done. Because the only way to do that is to go back and take the same drugs and try to reverse the damage. But when you arrive at that injunction path of, I don't know if I'm a human or a mountain, and there's nobody to help direct you down that path, there's no coming back from that. You essentially have to just guess and hope 50-50 you pick the right path. So if you arrive at an injunction point where I came from a reality where pedophilia is okay and another reality where it's not okay, and you go down one or the other, now you start getting into, you know, the potential for serious legal shit, getting yourself in bad trouble. And so this is where a lot of the dangers of these drugs come into play. As I mentioned before, they're very dangerous. There's potential to kill yourself using them. You could get some kind of mental state that would land you either in prison or end up getting dead or shot on the street. There's all kinds of bad things that can happen, but there's also good things too. Well, wow. I hope you made it through the entire video. I'm about at the end right now. I can't really think of anything that's, you know, crucial that needs to be covered further to this topic. If I continue to take these drugs in the future and I have more experiences, then I'll probably share them eventually at some point on the channel here. If you're interested in hearing more about my thoughts on this topic, then make sure to leave some comments below or let me know that you maybe want a follow-up video. If there was anything that you weren't necessarily clear about on the scientific side of things, either with the physics or the brain chemistry or the psychology or anything like that, make sure to let me know, and I hope I can clarify it in a further video. Until then, I'm just, you know, hoping and wishing the best for Connor. Hopefully he can get the treatment that he needs. I don't know if it's even possible to reverse the damage that's been done at this point. But until then, I guess we're just going to continue to watch this train wreck unfold on social media. Thanks for watching. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.